The Grand Hall of the Imperial Council was massive, a colossal structure of polished metal and gleaming glass that reflected the cold indifference of the Empire itself. Alien diplomats and military officers from across the galaxy gathered for the annual summit, their voices a cacophony of foreign languages, each one laced with the arrogance of centuries-old superiority. At the head of the room sat Supreme Empress Galactic, her sleek, silver hair and sharp, angular features radiating an unsettling grace. She surveyed the room, her eyes glittering with authority, as she listened to the latest reports from the various military sectors. General Marcus Hale, seated among the other representatives, felt the weight of their dismissive stares. His presence here, among the galaxy's elite leaders, was nothing more than a formality. Humanity had only recently established its foothold in the galaxy, and the Empire had made it abundantly clear that their species was nothing more than a curiosity. Hale had heard the whispers, the mockery, the subtle derision that permeated every interaction. It was as if humanity were a fleeting spark in the vast, indifferent darkness of the stars. Too small, too insignificant to matter. The Council's latest session had reached a critical juncture. The Zyrex warlords, an ancient and violent faction from the Outer Rim, had begun making bold moves, testing the Empire's boundaries. The need for a united front had never been more urgent, and yet, instead of focusing on the war, the topic of the moment was the proposal of granting humanity a seat at the Galactic Council. A Kolfar, a towering reptilian diplomat, hissed disdainfully from his seat as he adjusted his ceremonial robes. The humans, an entire species, so primitive. Their technology is laughable, and their tactics are merely a desperate scramble for survival. What could they possibly bring to the table? His words were met with murmurs of agreement from the other delegates, their faces cold with skepticism. Hale's hands clenched at his sides, but he remained still, his face unreadable. The words stung, yet he had heard them all before. For every victory humanity achieved, the galaxy's elites found ways to belittle the species' accomplishments. Whether it was the defeat of the Zyrex raiders on the frontier, or the strategic capture of a key mineral-rich system, humanity's efforts were always overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of superiority from the galactic powers. One of the higher-ranking Imperial generals, Caravis, a lean and arrogant Talman, leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. A human representative in the council. Ridiculous. They have no understanding of galactic politics. They are far too unpredictable. We need minds shaped by eons of experience, not creatures who still rely on emotion and brute force to survive. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. But then Hale stood. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him. And for a moment, he allowed the weight of their gazes to settle on him. It was the first time he'd ever spoken in these chambers, and the moment felt monumental, a crossroads in history. "I disagree, General Teravis," Hale said, his voice unwavering. The room tensed at his challenge. He was well aware of the consequences of speaking out in such a setting, but he pressed on, his words sharp and deliberate. "Humanity may not have eons of history, but we have something none of you possess, the will to fight, to adapt, and to win when everything seems lost." A cold silence enveloped the room. He could feel the weight of their gazes on him. Some amused, others incredulous. But Hale stood taller, his face steady. "We may not have centuries of wisdom," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "but we have something more valuable. A fire that refuses to burn out. We are not bound by tradition. We are not prisoners of the past. We are a species that thrives in the face of adversity." The room was still. He could feel the judgment in the air, but he stood firm, every word like a challenge to their complacency. "You underestimate humanity. I promise you, the day will come when you'll wish you hadn't." As the council simmered in uneasy silence, Empress Calarix's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "General Hale," she said, her tone cool, "we shall see if your species can live up to your boast." General Marcus Hale stood on the balcony of the command center, staring out at the view of the barren moon below. Its surface was dotted with craters, the remnants of a world that had once been inhabited, now left to the mercy of the Empire's indifference. It was far from the glorious battlefields he had dreamed of, far from the commanding presence he envisioned when he first enlisted. But now it was his responsibility, and he would make something of it. The hollow hum of the comm system broke the silence. A message flickered on the screen before him. General Hale, your fleet is ready for deployment. You have clearance to proceed with the plan. Hale's fingers hovered over the controls, but he hesitated for only a moment before sending the order. He knew his task here was far from glamorous. This world, Terra II, was a quiet outpost on the fringes of the galaxy, one that didn't matter to the Empire. It had been left to rot under the guise of a military drill, while the Empire poured resources into more critical operations, like suppressing the Zyrex warlords on the edge of Empire-controlled space. But to Hale, Terra I was more than just a footnote. It was an opportunity. This was where he would prove humanity's worth. His reputation had been built on the same thing: taking the underdog, the impossible, and making it into a victory. If anyone could turn this barren wasteland into a symbol of human resilience, it was him. A low voice broke through his thoughts. Colonel Asherik, his second in command. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mix of determination and weariness. She was one of the few officers who had joined him early, someone who believed in his potential when most others had written him off. You know they're not going to give you credit for this, right? She asked, her eyes scanning the empty stretch of land outside. Hale nodded without looking at her. I know. They think we're too small, too unpredictable. But we'll prove them wrong. This will be a test, not just for humanity, but for the entire Empire. His voice hardened. We're not just fighting for survival anymore, Asha. We're fighting for respect. Asha's gaze softened, but she remained focused. Then let's make sure we win. And not just by the book. Hale gave her a small smile. She was right. The Empire's tactics were predictable, conventional and rigid, built on the assumption that sheer firepower would always win the day. But that wasn't the human way. Humans, despite their relative youth in the galaxy, had a history of overcoming the impossible. It was their adaptability, their refusal to quit, that made them dangerous. And it was time to show the galaxy that the human spirit could not be measured by the same standards as other species. As the hours passed, the situation grew dire. The Draketh, a war-hardened race known for their brutal invasions and advanced weaponry, launched an attack on a nearby system. The Empire's defenses in that region were weak, distracted by the Zyrex threat elsewhere. General Hale's mission to defend Terra I had been meant to bolster morale, but as the Draketh began their assault, he realized it was much more. This was not just a small skirmish. This was the beginning of something much bigger. It didn't take long for the reports to flood in. The Draketh had overwhelmed the nearest Imperial garrisons, and their fleet was closing in on the sector. Hale could hear the panic in the voices of the communications officers as they relayed the situation. His fleet, comprising a ragtag mix of human and alien ships, was vastly outgunned and outnumbered. But Hale had never been one to follow the easy path. He turned to Asha. Gather the troops. It's time we show them who they're dealing with. Under the cover of night, Hale deployed his forces with precision, using the barren terrain of Terra I to his advantage. While the Draketh believed they were fighting a disorganized force of humans, Hale's plan was anything but random. He had studied their weaknesses, observed their tactics, and now he would turn their confidence into their greatest vulnerability. Let them underestimate us, Hale muttered under his breath, his face set with determination. They won't see us coming. The first strike was swift. Hale's forces, using guerrilla tactics, harried the Draketh with hit-and-run attacks, taking out supply lines and smaller units. They used the planet's craters to hide their movements, setting traps, and using the Draketh's overconfidence against them. As the Draketh were thrown into disarray, Hale's forces struck harder, using the element of surprise to cripple their command structure. A victory here wouldn't just be tactical, it would be symbolic. As Hale surveyed the battlefield from his command center, he allowed himself a small, victorious smile. This wasn't just the beginning of a battle. It was the beginning of humanity's rise. The tranquility of Terra Eva's barren landscape, shattered as the distant hum of Dryketh warships, began to resonate across the moon's surface. General Hale's small fleet, though battle-tested, was outmatched in sheer numbers and firepower. His forces were not equipped for a prolonged conflict with the Dryketh, a race known for their relentless, devastating style of warfare. Their ships, sleek and armored, bristled with advanced weaponry, capable of reducing entire cities to ash in mere hours. Hale knew he couldn't win a conventional fight. Instead, he would need to outthink them. Again. It didn't take long for the Dryketh to initiate their invasion. Their main fleet dropped from hyperspace, arriving with the force of a tempest. Wave after wave of troop transports and battlecruisers descended upon the planet, their weapons opening fire on Terra I's weak defenses, obliterating outposts and communication relays before most of Hale's soldiers could even respond. The battle erupted in an instant. The hum of energy weapons, the roar of cannons, and the screeching shriek of the Dryketh war cries filled the air. At the command center, Hale watched the carnage unfold on his tactical display, his mind already working through contingency plans. "We've got 2 hours before their main assault force reaches the southern base," Asha said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "What's the plan, sir?" Hale's gaze remained fixed on the screen as the Dryketh dropped more forces onto the surface, their ground troops marching in brutal formation. It was only a matter of time before they overwhelmed the small Imperial defense lines. But Hale wasn't about to sit back and let that happen. He tapped his fingers on the edge of the console, his mind racing. "We're going to hit them where it hurts," Hale said, his voice calm but commanding. "We'll use their arrogance against them." The Dryketh were known for their brutal efficiency, their confidence in their superior strength often clouding their judgment. They believed that overwhelming force and sheer intimidation were enough to break any enemy. They had no reason to think that humans, let alone a ragtag group of humans, could challenge their power. But Hale knew better. He had seen how the Dryketh fought, how they rely on rigid, predictable patterns. That was their weakness. They never expected someone to outthink them, especially not someone like him, a human with limited resources, but an abundance of cunning. Within the hour, Hale had already mobilized his forces. He coordinated with his alien allies, sly Retheri mercenaries, and skilled Verkan engineers, creating a web of decoys, improvised weaponry, and hidden positions in the planet's craters. He had seen firsthand that the Dryketh were never cautious in their approach. They would charge in headlong, overconfident that their firepower alone would break any resistance. Hale's plan was deceptively simple: make them think they were winning, then crush them when they were most vulnerable. He ordered his fleet to scatter, moving in random trajectories, pulling the Dryketh forces away from their core objectives and drawing them into a massive trap. Meanwhile, ground units used the rugged terrain to their advantage, setting up ambushes, using long-range disruptors to disable Dryketh vehicles and scatter their formations. Hale knew the Dryketh would eventually split into smaller groups, each one thinking they could take the humans down easily. That's when they'd find themselves surrounded. The first wave of Dryketh shock troops hit the eastern defense line, charging through craters and abandoned outposts with firestorm intensity. But as they surged forward, they triggered a series of electromagnetic pulses, disabling their tanks and communication systems. The humans, waiting in the shadows, opened fire. Blinding energy blasts erupted, catching the Dryketh forces off guard and disrupting their command structure. From the skies above, Hale's fleet swooped in with precise aerial strikes, hitting vulnerable points in the Dryketh's rear guard. The battle was chaos, shifting back and forth as the Dryketh realized they were facing something they had not anticipated. A fight that was more than just brute strength. Hale's fleet, and his ground forces moved with a coordinated ferocity. For every Drakith strike, there was a counterstrike waiting. Every advance met with another clever trap. The Drakith were forced to regroup, retreating into the very terrain they thought would be their advantage. Hale watched the battle unfold from the command center, a steady focus in his eyes. His fingers drummed lightly on the console. He had the Drakith exactly where he wanted them. The tide had turned. Only now did he see the flicker of doubt in their eyes. "Sir," Ash's voice came through the comms. "They're pulling back. It's working." The Drakith, once so confident in their victory, were now reeling. They had underestimated humanity, not just in numbers or strength, but in sheer adaptability. Hale knew that if they could hold this line and deal one more devastating blow, they could turn the entire sector's fate. As he turned toward his forces, he spoke with quiet resolve. "We fight until the last breath. This is where we turn the tide." With the Drakith forces now in disarray, Hale's victory would be a monumental blow to their reputation and the Empire's perception of humanity. The message was clear. Humanity had the ability to change the course of galactic wars, not through might, but through cunning, courage, and an unyielding spirit. The tides of the battle had shifted, but General Marcus Hale knew that a single victory wouldn't be enough. The Drakith were no strangers to loss. They would regroup, adapt, and return with even more ferocity. Hale had to think bigger, or the victory would be short-lived, nothing more than a fleeting moment of success against a far stronger foe. He stood on the bridge of the flagship Conqueror, the hum of the engines beneath his feet a constant reminder of the delicate dance he was about to orchestrate. The screens before him flickered with data feeds, scans of the Drakith's fleet, now reorganizing in a large defensive formation just outside Terra's orbit. Their previous retreat had been tactical, a feint to draw the humans into the open. Hale had no intention of being baited into another slaughter. "What's the status of the Drakith fleet?" Hale asked, his voice firm and calculated. "Fleet reorganization complete, sir," Asha replied, her hands flying over the control panels. "They've begun to form a defensive perimeter around their flagship. They're preparing to strike back with full force." Hale nodded slowly, his mind working through the possibilities. His forces were still reeling from the initial wave of Drakith assault, and even though they had gained ground, they were far from ready to engage in a direct confrontation with the larger, better-equipped enemy. "We're not going to fight them head-on," Hale muttered to himself, almost as if speaking to the stars themselves. Then, louder, he looked up. "No, we're going to use their arrogance to finish this." In the war rooms, Hale convened his closest advisors, including his best tacticians, a mix of human and alien officers. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of their mission. They had already fought one battle against impossible odds. But this next stage required something even more unconventional. Hale's plan was audacious, something few would even dare suggest. "We're going to turn their superiority against them," Hale began, his voice steady and resolute. "We're going to break their confidence by making them believe they're winning. Until it's too late." Asha raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of a feint, General. A trap." Hale smiled, though his eyes were cold with determination. "Not just a feint. A full-on illusion. We're going to make them think they're attacking Terra's core defenses, draw their forces out into the open, then isolate their flagship. Once we have them fragmented, we hit them where they least expect it." The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of frantic preparation. Hale's forces split into small, agile groups, each given one clear mission: to create distractions and chaos. Using long-range subspace signals, they jammed communications, spreading misinformation across the Drakith network. Drakith scouts reported phantom movements, exaggerated signs of weakness in the human defense lines, feeding the Drakith's growing sense of superiority. Meanwhile, Hale's fleet spread itself thin, making it appear that the humans were retreating. They left false traces of retreating ships, unmanned decoys to draw attention, each one destroyed in quick, violent bursts of energy, further convincing the Draketh they were winning. The general's forces would then scatter, only to regroup in different, less predictable patterns, constantly staying just one step ahead. The Draketh, eager for an easy victory, were drawn into the trap, sending their most elite forces chasing after what they thought were the last pockets of human resistance. As predicted, their flagship, a massive warcruiser, moved forward with reckless abandon, leading the charge with overconfidence. Hours passed, and Hale watched it all unfold from the command center aboard the Conqueror. The Draketh flagship was now separated from the rest of their fleet, the chase having drawn them too far from their backup forces. The Draketh, thinking they had cornered their prey, began to open fire on one of the human decoys. "Now," Hale said, his voice calm yet filled with an intensity that was palpable. "Prepare to launch the counteroffensive." Hale's fleet, hidden in plain sight behind the far side of the moon, unleashed a devastating volley of energy blasts at the Draketh flagship. The first strike hit their shields, sending a shockwave of energy reverberating through their hull. The Draketh flagship faltered, the shock of the attack enough to throw them into disarray. A barrage of missiles followed, aimed directly at the weak points Hale had observed in the enemy's ship design. The Draketh flagship was now blind to the sudden threat. For the next hour, the battle turned into a symphony of calculated strikes. The humans, despite being outgunned, used their smaller, more maneuverable ships to full advantage, weaving in and out of the Draketh fleet's disorganized defenses. Every shot, every missile was placed with surgical precision. But Hale knew the true key to victory had already been set into motion. The Draketh flagship, separated from the rest of their fleet, was vulnerable. With precise timing, Hale's forces converged on the flagship, launching a final devastating assault on its engines. The flagship, once an untouchable symbol of Draketh power, was now crippled, its advanced systems failing. For the Draketh, it was an unthinkable blow. Their leaders had expected easy pickings, an easy victory. Instead, they found themselves on the brink of total collapse. "Victory is ours," Asha said, standing beside Hale as the final blasts were fired at the crippled Draketh flagship. The once feared warship listed to one side as the last of its defensive systems failed. Hale didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the dying glow of the Draketh flagship on his display. The fight wasn't over, not yet. But one thing was clear. Humanity had just delivered the first blow in a war that would reshape the galaxy. The silence that followed the destruction of the Draketh flagship was deafening, broken only by the subdued hum of machinery and the faint beeps from the communication panels. General Hale stood motionless, his eyes locked on the holographic display of the battlefield. The Draketh fleet had been thrown into chaos, their flagship now a smoldering ruin drifting in the void. But despite their victory, Hale couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His crew, on the other hand, couldn't contain their exhilaration. Cheers erupted across the command center of the Conqueror, and Ash's voice cut through the noise, her tone sharp with both pride and wariness. "General, we've done it. The Draketh flagship is disabled, and their remaining forces are retreating." Hale nodded, though his expression remained grim. "Victory is fleeting, Colonel. We've won this battle, but the war is far from over. They'll regroup, and when they do, they'll come back with everything they have." Asha fell silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. Hale was right. The Draketh were not a species to forgive a humiliating defeat. Their pride would drive them to vengeance. The question was no longer if the Draketh would retaliate, but how, and how quickly they would come back at humanity with their full might. Hours later, as the last of the Draketh warships limped out of the system, Hale ordered a full tactical assessment. His forces had taken heavy damage, many ships severely crippled, and a dozen or more had been lost in the fray. The price of victory was steep. Their fleet was battered, and their supplies were running low. For all the triumph of this moment, they were still facing a larger, well-funded enemy that would only grow more dangerous as time passed. "We need to fortify our defenses," Hale said, his mind already calculating the next phase of their operations. "We'll need reinforcements, supplies, and most of all, time. Time to regroup, rebuild, and strike again." While the human fleet began to repair and rearm, Hale turned his attention to the next critical issue. The Empire. The Drakith had been an immediate threat, but their presence also indicated something far more troubling. This was only the beginning of a larger conflict. The Empire had watched the entire battle from a distance, its surveillance networks tracking every move. And with the Drakith's defeat, Hale knew they would turn their eyes toward humanity. A diplomatic envoy had already arrived in the system, sent by the Empire to assess the outcome of the battle. Empress Calyrix had made it clear that humanity's position in the galaxy was still precarious. And now, with the Empire's attention focused on the humans' unexpected victory, Hale knew the coming negotiations would be a high-stakes game. They would either cement humanity's place in galactic politics or wipe it from existence entirely. The envoy was a sharp contrast to the usual Imperial diplomats. This one, Commander Vezrax, a tall, imposing Kelfar with a reputation for ruthlessness. His ship, a sleek, black warship, glided silently into orbit, accompanied by a pair of smaller vessels. Hale stood on the command deck of the Conqueror, staring at the holo signal of the approaching delegation. He knew what was at stake. The outcome of these talks would either define humanity's future or doom them. The door to the command center hissed open, and Asha stepped in, her expression grave. "General, we've just received word. The Empire wants an audience. They're sending Vezrax directly. No intermediaries. It's not a simple negotiation. It's a test." Hale sighed, running a hand over his face. "A test of what?" "Of our strength. They'll want to see if we're truly a threat, or if we're just a nuisance that can be easily crushed." Hale exhaled sharply. This was it. Humanity's chance to prove its worth, or perish under the heel of an empire that had underestimated them from the start. The meeting was set on the Conqueror's Bridge. The moment Vezrax appeared on the holoscreen, the atmosphere in the room turned tense. The Kelthar's voice was like ice, cold and calculated. "General Hale," Vezrax said, his eyes glinting with amusement, "it seems your species has a certain resilience. But resilience alone does not win wars, and resilience alone will not change the future of the galaxy." Hale stood tall, his posture unwavering. He knew Vezrax's game. The Empire wasn't interested in mere survival. They wanted control, dominance, and the ability to manipulate every piece on the chessboard. And to them, humanity was still a pawn, a curiosity. Hale would need to convince them otherwise. "We didn't fight to survive," Hale responded firmly. "We fought to win. And we'll continue to fight until we've earned our place in the galaxy, not as your subordinates, but as equals." Vezrax's expression darkened, but a hint of respect flickered in his eyes. "Very well, General Hale. You've proven you can fight. But know this, the Empire will not tolerate insolence, nor will it tolerate those who challenge its authority. We will give you this moment, but the next time you cross us, there will be no mercy." With that, the holo image of Vezrax flickered out, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. As Hale turned to face his officers, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. The Empire had issued its warning, but it had also acknowledged humanity's strength. Now, it was up to Hale and his forces to make sure they didn't just survive. They needed to show the galaxy that humanity could lead, could thrive, and could shape the future in their image. The stakes had just been raised. The days following the encounter with Commander Vezrax were tense. General Hale knew that the Empire had not been impressed by the Drakith defeat. It was simply an obstacle out of the way for them. The true test had always been how humanity would handle their next steps. Would they bow to the Empire's might, or would they stand firm and fight for their independence? The Conqueror moved silently through the vast expanse of space, its damaged hull slowly being repaired. While the repairs were critical, Hale knew the real battle was not in the outer edges of space. It was in the political arena. The Empire, though begrudgingly respectful of humanity's tactical genius, had made it clear they would not let such an uprising go unpunished. The human fleet, no matter how resilient, was no match for the Empire's full strength. "We need more time," Hale muttered to himself, staring out of the observation window. Time to rebuild. Time to gather allies. Asha, ever vigilant, approached him quietly. "General, the Empire's envoy is demanding a response. It seems Vizrax was only the beginning." "I expected as much," Hale replied, his eyes hardening. "And I'm sure they've already prepared a counteroffensive." "Do you think they'll launch another attack?" she asked, though she knew the answer as well as he did. "Not yet. The Empire won't risk an open war until they have everything in place. They'll play the long game, keep us on edge, waiting for us to make the wrong move." Just as Hale was about to continue, an urgent message came through the command console. It was from an unknown source, encrypted, coded. Hale's eyes narrowed. "Put it through," he ordered. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the shadowy figure, its face partially obscured. The voice that followed was low and almost reverberated with a strange sense of foreboding. "General Hale, we have been watching your rise. Your success against the Drakith, though impressive, will not shield you from the Empire's wrath. However, there is a possibility for a partnership, a mutually beneficial arrangement." Asha's brow furrowed as she glanced at Hale. "Who is this?" The figure's lips curled upward slightly. "Who I am is not important. What I offer, however, is a way to defeat the Empire before they crush you. A way to strike at the heart of their power." Hale's eyes were sharp with suspicion. "And why should I trust you?" "Because," the figure replied, its voice unwavering, "I am not the only one who sees the Empire's weaknesses. You've proven that it is possible to challenge them. What you need is leverage, a chance to level the playing field." Hale took a moment to weigh the implications of the offer. He had seen enough betrayals and half-truths to know that nothing in this galaxy came for free. But the notion of an ally who had knowledge of the Empire's inner workings, an ally who could help turn the tide, was too tempting to ignore. "What do you propose?" Hale finally asked. The shadowy figure leaned closer. "There is a faction within the Empire, disillusioned and opposed to the Empress's rule. They have resources, intelligence, and a desire to see her reign end. Join us, and we will give you the means to strike directly at her power base. In return, you will owe us nothing. But remember this, time is short. The Empire will not wait for you to make your move." The message ended abruptly, leaving an unsettling silence in the room. Asha turned to Hale, her expression conflicted. "This could be the break we need. But it feels wrong, doesn't it? We don't know who they are or what their true intentions are." "I know," Hale replied, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "But we don't have the luxury of time. If we wait too long, the Empire will suffocate us before we ever get the chance to strike back. We have to play this game, whether we trust this figure or not." "Then what's our next step?" Asha pressed, her eyes narrowing with determination. "We need to find out who they really are, and if they can deliver on their promises. But for now, we play the waiting game. Keep our eyes open and gather more intel." Days turned into weeks as Hale's fleet continued to rebuild, his officers working tirelessly to repair the damage done during the battle with the Drakith. The Empire, meanwhile, kept a quiet but noticeable presence in the region, perhaps waiting for the next move, perhaps testing humanity's resolve. The message from the mysterious figure gnawed at Hale's mind, its implications clear. This was a game that could change everything. But it could just as easily be a trap. As the repairs to the Conqueror progressed, Hale knew one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer a footnote in the galaxy's history. They had been noticed, They had been tested, and now they had a choice: fight alone, or take the risk of allying with an unknown faction within the Empire. The weight of that decision settled on Hale's shoulders like an anchor. If they chose wrong, there would be no going back. The next few days passed in a tense limbo. General Hale, despite his tactical brilliance in battle, now found himself in the unfamiliar territory of political strategy, a battlefield where every move could have far-reaching consequences. The message from the shadowy figure continued to haunt his thoughts. They had offered power, knowledge, and an opportunity to strike at the heart of the Empire. But at what cost? Hale knew he had to tread carefully. His mind raced, and his sleep became fitful, filled with visions of the Empire's shadow looming over humanity. He had seen what they could do to planets that crossed them: Earth, Terra II, and all their colonies. They were nothing in the eyes of the Empire. And yet there was one thing they hadn't counted on: humanity's resilience. Now, Hale had to determine if that resilience was enough to topple the might of the galaxy's most powerful empire. In the war room aboard the Conqueror, Hale met with his most trusted officers, including Asha, who had been keeping an eye on Empire communications and their movements in the sector. The Empire isn't acting like they're planning an attack, Asha began, reviewing the data from her console. They've been quieter than usual. Almost too quiet. I don't like it. Hale leaned forward, his brow furrowed. They're biding their time. After the Drakith debacle, they'll want to make sure they strike when it's least expected. We can't wait for them to make the first move. We need to take the initiative. Asha paused, tapping a few keys on her console. We've been hearing rumors of unrest within the Empire. Factions, some discontent brewing beneath the surface. I know it's risky, but if this message is legitimate, and there is a faction within the Empire that wants to see the Empress fall, we could play that angle. But we can't just trust someone offering us help with no strings attached. Hale replied sharply. If we get too close to these factions, we risk becoming their pawns. The last thing we need is to become entangled in another war. The Empire has enough enemies without us adding fuel to the fire. Asha nodded. True, but if we can destabilize the Empire from within, weaken their command structure before they have the chance to retaliate, we might have a chance. We can't fight them head-on. Not yet. We need to weaken them strategically. Hale turned back to the holographic map of the galaxy, fingers tapping lightly on the table. His eyes narrowed as he thought about the next move. I agree, but we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more they prepare. We can't give them the time they need to stabilize. We need to make sure that, no matter how powerful they are, they're always looking over their shoulders. The decision to contact the mysterious faction within the Empire came within a week. Hale knew the risk of opening himself and his fleet up to unknown variables, but the Empire's resources were growing exponentially. Soon, they would crush humanity if they couldn't find an ally who had a vested interest in seeing the Empire's reign come to an end. The encrypted transmission was sent through several layers of encryption and relay stations. Hale had no illusions. This was dangerous. They had no idea who was truly behind the message or what their ultimate goal was. The only thing that was certain was that they needed help, and this was the only lead they had. Hours later, an encrypted response came through. The figure, who had once been a shadow in the galaxy, now materialized once again on the holoscreen. This time, however, the image was clearer, the face more defined. A woman with sharp features and an intensity that could rival any battle-hardened warrior. General Hale, she began, her voice calm and controlled. I see you've made your choice. You understand the risks, I assume. I do, Hale replied cautiously, and I understand the consequences of failure. But I have no choice. We need leverage against the Empire. You have it, the woman said, but you must act quickly. The Empire will soon begin its purge of dissidents within its ranks. The clock is ticking. We are ready to move, if you're ready to take that first step. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had started. The woman, who Hale now recognized as one of the leaders of the faction, had been direct, cold even. There was no room for hesitation, no room for second-guessing. She had given them the go-ahead. All they needed to do was move. Asha's voice broke through Hale's thoughts. "General, what now?" Hale looked out the window of the war room, watching the stars stretch past them as they sped toward their next destination. He felt the weight of the decision settle in. "Now we take the fight to the heart of the Empire," he said, his voice a quiet promise. "We destabilize their command, disrupt their networks, and make them realize they've underestimated humanity. We show them that we are not a threat to be wiped out, but a force that can reshape the galaxy." But even as Hale spoke, a nagging doubt tugged at the back of his mind. The risks were enormous. If they moved too quickly, they might expose themselves to the Empire's wrath. If they moved too slowly, they would never have a chance to win the war. With one final look at the galaxy map, Hale knew there was no turning back. The next few days would be crucial. It was a time for action, for bold moves, and for setting humanity's fate in motion. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation and uncertainty. General Hale's strategy had become clearer: destabilize the Empire's control through coordinated sabotage and intelligence leaks, all while carefully navigating the delicate balance of the mysterious faction within the Empire. Every move had to be calculated, every alliance carefully measured, for one wrong step could mean humanity's swift annihilation. Hale gathered his senior officers in the command center of the Conqueror, the large holographic map of the galaxy flickering in front of them, pinpointing key Imperial targets. Every ship in their fleet had been reassigned to one of several operations, each one designed to undermine the Empire's stability. "Time is not on our side," Hale began, his voice unwavering, though his eyes betrayed the weight of his decision. "We have one shot at this. If we're successful, we disrupt the Empire's ability to wage war, fragment their command structure, and throw them into chaos. But if we fail, we're finished. We'll have painted a target on humanity's back, and the Empire will come for us with everything they have." Asha nodded, her brow furrowed. "We'll have to strike quickly, hit them where they least expect it. No direct confrontations yet, not until we know how deep the rot runs." Hale looked to the rest of the officers, his eyes scanning the room. "Agreed. Our first targets are Imperial logistics hubs, places that support their war effort. We cripple their ability to resupply, and we force them to react. It will buy us time, but we need to stay ahead of them." The officers nodded, their faces grim but resolute. They had no illusions about the danger. There was no turning back now. As the fleet set its course toward the first target, Hale found himself alone in his quarters, staring at the data feeds on his console. The information from the faction within the Empire had proven valuable. Weaknesses in the Imperial supply lines, vulnerable choke points, and even a few high-ranking officials who were ripe for manipulation. But he still felt the nagging sense that something wasn't right. Every piece of intelligence felt too perfect, too easy. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from Asha. "General, we have a problem." "Go ahead," Hale replied, leaning forward. "We've intercepted an Imperial transmission, high-level communications. The Empress knows we've been targeting their supply lines. They're preparing a counteroffensive. We're not just on their radar anymore. We're their primary focus." Hale's jaw tightened. So much for buying time. How long until they arrive? "At current speed, they'll be here in less than 3 days." He cursed under his breath. The window of opportunity was closing fast. They had to act now or risk being overwhelmed. Hale stood up, his mind racing. He had been hoping for more time to gather allies, but it seemed that the Empire's response was inevitable. "Gather the fleet," he said, his voice steely. "Prepare for immediate action. We hit the next target. Hard. We don't have the luxury of hesitation anymore." The fleet moved swiftly, silent and deadly. As they approached their next target, a massive Imperial depot on a remote moon, Hale's mind focused solely on the task at hand. He couldn't afford distractions. The Empire would soon be in full pursuit, and he had to make sure they paid the price for every moment they wasted. The assault was swift. The Conqueror led the charge, its weapons opening fire on the Imperial depot, while smaller ships moved in to plant explosive charges. Within moments, chaos erupted as the depot's security systems were overwhelmed. The explosion sent shockwaves across the moon, lighting up the blackness of space. But the true success was not in the destruction. It was in the data they gathered. The information hidden in the facility's archives would prove invaluable, revealing key weaknesses in the Empire's military infrastructure. As the Conqueror pulled back to regroup, Hale watched the destruction unfold on the view screen. The Empire's response would come quickly, and it would be brutal. But now, they had leverage. They had a chance to disrupt their enemies. Just as Hale thought the operation had been a success, a new message came through, this one from the mysterious faction. The Empire is already moving against you. The voice on the other end said, calm and emotionless. You must act quickly. If you do not strike now, they will crush your forces. The Empress is already mobilizing a fleet to erase humanity's influence from the galaxy. Hale's blood ran cold. What are you suggesting? Take the fight to her directly, the voice replied. We have a plan. You have what you need. Strike at the heart of the Empire, her seat of power. Do it now before she has the chance to retaliate. The implications of the message were clear. Humanity had come to a crossroads. Hale knew that this was the final move. If they attacked the Empress's capital now, they would either force the Empire to collapse, or they would doom themselves entirely. The stakes had never been higher. Turning to Asha, Hale's voice was grim but resolute. We're going to the heart of the Empire. Asha's eyes met his, a mix of determination and uncertainty in them. Are we ready? We have no choice, Hale replied. We either win this war now, or we don't survive to fight another day. As the fleet readied for the final assault, Hale's mind wandered back to the decision that had brought them here. This was it. The galaxy would remember humanity's defiance, either as a story of triumph or one of tragic failure. But there was no turning back now.